research in biology, I'm going to talk to you about something completely unconnected with my expertise. So I'm very likely to be wrong, but that's part of fun in doing things. So the topic for discussion today is food for thought. And what I'd like to tell you about is actually something that is thought for food. That is how important thinking together can be for our well-being, food, health, just intellectual exercise and so on and so forth. And really the point I'd like to take home is that if you look at the world today, if you look at China and the way it's growing, if you look at India with all its problems, if you look at Africa with its mineral resources, huge population growth, all of these are viewed as problems. But perhaps integrating higher education and research across Asia and Africa can be an example which can bring prosperity to the world rather than these three sort of large countries or continents being cause for problems. And the reason why starting small and working together in something like research could actually be an example for broader cooperation comes from an example, that is the European Union, which today might be having problems, but Europe came together after many wars by trying to work together on having a common policy for how coal is mined and traded across Europe. So starting small from something like coal, the European Union was built. And the question is, can we start small by looking at research across Africa, China and India and Asia in general to see how one can bring prosperity as well as education and research to the region. So there's a huge Indian bottom now, and you're all part of the bottom. And the bottom is, if you look at India, people under the age of 25 or so, there are several 100 million Indians. And this is called the demographic problem or the demographic dividend, depending on your viewpoint. But the point is that these young people need to have a future right away in the next few years. Otherwise, we're going to have a serious global problem. Right? There's another global problem that comes from China, and that's a Chinese bulge. China's population demography is very different. There are very few young people in China. There are many middle-aged people. China is cash-rich, ambitious, and needs to grow. But where are the young people for China to grow on that scale? China doesn't have that young population. And this desire for China to grow and its inability to deal with that growth is going to be a global problem. And Africa is another kind of problem. Africa is very diverse. It's got prosperous countries, less prosperous countries, countries which are in political trouble. But if you look at Africa on this map, this region here shows the global median age. And Africa has a very low global median age. India is somewhere in between. China has got a very high global median age. Africa is very young, hugely mineral rich. China is investing in Africa, much to the worry of the West. And there's a fear that China will overrun Africa because of its need for its growth. And India is unable to invest in Africa in the same way. And India has its own problems, which I told you about. Its big bottom, which it has to deal with in its search for prosperity. So all these seem to be completely unsurmountable problems. So the Chinese concerns, concerns about China that people all over the world have, is the growth of China to the West is a double-edged sword. The West needs China because China lends to the West. It's necessary for the Western economy, but China's speed of growth can create a serious problem. Typically, world wars have occurred when the desire for economic growth is much, much higher than the capacity for that growth. The two major world wars we've had seem to be driven by that kind of a need for growth. So China's growth is a concern to many. But this growth is also a concern right now in the context of other problems. And there's a historian in Harvard, his name is Paul Kennedy, and he says that right now is a time similar to the time before the Second World War. He thinks it's a very, very difficult time for the world. And he says that there's a steady erosion of the dollar. These are the reasons why we're in trouble, according to Paul Kennedy. There's a steady erosion of the dollar. There is a paralysis of the European project, which I alluded to. I told you about Europe and how dramatic countries at war came together, but that whole project seems to be in paralysis right now. There's an arms race occurring in Asia, actually, which we are part of. China is growing. Indonesia, India are worried about that, and there's a huge investment in our defense budget, which is sapping us. At the least, at worst, it could actually lead to it. And there's a slow and steady decline of the concept of one world. The United Nations is falling apart. There isn't a significant aspect in the way the world can work together. Everyone is very depressed about it. So this is a very depressing situation, right? But in that depressing situation, the question is, can Africa and Asia work together to save the world? And this looks like turning the whole thing upside down. In the perspective of the West, Africa and Asia are the problems, right? But we are saying that Africa and Asia could actually well be the solution, because we have complementary strengths and needs within Africa, India and China in particular, but also the rest of Asia. So what could be the starting point? I mean, we can't solve everything. We can't solve politics, religion, regionalism, and so on and so forth. But just as coal was the nucleus which seeded the European Union, could education be the nucleus which seeds the Asian-African Union? Okay? So we leave out primary and secondary education. It's fully steeped in regional and local issues. It's very important, it has to be addressed well, but we don't want to deal with everything at the start right now. Let's leave this out. We'll also leave out, to some extent, we'll address a little later, scientific, technical, and medical education. It's much more easily addressable. It's much more readily possible to have students from Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand and Mozambique coming to India, and Indian students going to China, and so on. That's really feasible, but we'll leave that out for now. Let's start really small and just look at high-end research. It seems completely irrelevant to the big problems we talked about, but researchers all over the world are used to talking to others and completely agnostic to borders, national boundaries, religion, caste, and so on. Doesn't mean anything to researchers. So this community is actually used to working together. Now let's take each of these three parts which we're trying to bring together. Let's look at Africa first. It's got huge diversity, talent, and youth. It's in turmoil right now. That's a picture from Egypt. And unless something is done about Africa right now, we're going to be in serious trouble. But there's a burning desire in Africa for research and education. Just as you might want to become an astronomer, why shouldn't someone from the Congo have the opportunity to be an astronomer or a nuclear physicist? Why is it that when many people talk about countries such as India or parts of Africa or parts of China, they say that we must do research which is only relevant? What about blossoming the mind of the African or the Indian or the Chinese in a rural area? So research must combine our intellectual ambitions as well as solving our local problems. And that's something which a broader union can address, but can also address in important contexts such as Africa. Next, let's go to India. India's got huge challenges. I told you about the big bottom. But there's also a huge problem in our community having access to resources which allow us to blossom in research. The Indian research investment, though it has gone up hugely, is extremely small compared to what China has invested. China is investing hugely. Many argue that China is investing mindlessly, and India is unable to invest at that level over here. India is unable to get the best people in the world to come over here, and the best Indians end up going to relatively ordinary places because there are so many of us. So India has a serious problem in dealing with research. China is energetic, as I told you. It's often thought of as a dragon, but its resources and its ability to get things done could actually make it the same. So these three groups, Africa, India, and China, and the rest of Asia, work together. Maybe the world can be saved by us setting an example. So how can we work together? As I said, research can be a point to start. Higher education can come next. But there's a need for speed. We don't have 50 or 60 years like we had in 1947 to get established and do things well. Chinese growth has to be satiated soon. It's hungry right now. We can't say, let's wait for 10 or 20 years and plan this out carefully. The Indian demographic bottom is a serious problem now. It's not a problem which will be there, which can wait for a solution. And the African demography and political turmoil is also a serious problem. So all these things need to be addressed now. There's a huge need for moving fast. So let's start small. Let's say start a Pan-Afro-Asian research organization. Let's call it Afro-Asia Research, for example. It can be modeled along, for example, like the Max Planck Institutes. It has a central office, but it's got little labs all over the world, from Africa to China, to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and so on. Right? And these could be labs of all kinds. It could be basic research in sciences, in physics, in engineering, in humanities. It could be applied work in agriculture, medicine, and so on. These organizations will be autonomous. They'll be supported by money given by all the governments, but these will function completely independently. They're free of government interference, free of any government's interference. They'll have laboratories all over, as I said, and it should be attractive to the best people from anywhere in the world. The problem with India, with Africa, and with China is not that we don't have resources to do quality research, but we're not attractive to the best people in the world of any nationality to come and work. And that is absolutely essential if our research quality has to grow exponentially rather than grow linearly with a small slope. Okay? So we must be attractive to the best all over the world. India is trying to do that, by the way, in its own research laboratories. China is trying to do it, but both, I would argue, are ineffective because we're not working together. So this kind of a laboratory network will link mathematics and basic science and one society. It's important to have a mooring in one society. When you look at a French mathematician, you can see a distinct French cultural bias in the way she works. When you look at a Russian engineer, they are moored in Russian tradition and history. India, for too long, has looked at science and technology as something to be learned from elsewhere, and has therefore been a very good second-level imitator. If we are to take the lead, if China is to take the lead, if Africa is to take the lead, we must pose questions from our own environment as well as tackle the best questions from anywhere in the world. That capability can come from a can-do spirit, which is there now, but also by working together. But basic mathematics and research is very important for that. That would allow us to apply science and technology to environmental human questions and questions such as energy, which are very important. So this Afro-Asia Research Organization, which will inspire hopefully other kinds of collaborations, will allow a seamless movement of researchers from across all these member countries, and all the members of this organization, the member countries, will allow the workers in this organization to have citizenships of all the countries in the organization. So a researcher from Mozambique working in China will have Indian citizenship, Pakistani citizenship, and Thai citizenship, and can work to address whatever problem she might think attractive in any of these countries. So we broaden the pool, but even a Dutch person or an American or a Greek who's working in this organization will feel part of all these countries. So in terms of a high-end, technologically capable, scientifically capable community, this will result in getting the best people in the world to an attractive network. Cooperation on coal started the European Union. This is a picture in 1950 showing Robert Schuman, the French foreign minister, announcing this cooperation in coal. That led to the European Union, and hopefully cooperation in thinking can be the start of an Afro-Asian Union. Thank you.